Hi, everyone. If you are here and ready to join me, I'm going to give it one more minute so that we can start at 10 a.m. on the nose. Well, possibly 1 p.m. if you're Eastern time. 10 a.m. for me over here in Portland. Good morning for those of you that are possibly still starting your day like I am. And actually it is 10 o'clock, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. So first of all, thanks again for joining us. My name is Michelle Miller, and I'm the CEO of ARINGO Americas. ARINGO is an MBA admissions consulting firm. We've been in business for 15 years now, and we are a global company. So no matter where you are in the world, chances are we have somebody nearby who can help you. But enough about ARINGO. I'll tell you more about us later. But as you know, we're here to talk about the Kellogg MBA at Northwestern University. Very competitive program, as I'm sure you all know already, and that's probably why you're here. But it's competitive for a reason. It's an excellent program. So, as I said, I'm Michelle Miller, and a little bit about me. I've been with ARINGO for 4 years now. Extremely enjoyable work, meeting incredibly talented and dynamic candidates, also working with a very talented staff from several of the top schools as well. As I mentioned earlier, I live in the Portland area over in Oregon. If you've never been, you must come. It's beautiful and everything you hear is true. We all have dogs and love gardening and coffee. Which actually I was going to share some of my hobbies, but I think I just did. So let's go ahead and jump in and talk about Kellogg. So starting out with some fun facts. First of all, Kellogg was founded in 1908. As you all know, it's in Evanston, Illinois, not too far from Chicago. Kellogg's name actually changed several times at the beginning. It started out as the School of Commerce. It later became the Graduate School of Management. But in 1979, the son of the Kellogg cereal company gave a large donation, and in return, it was named the Kellogg School of Management. Thought I'd throw in the fun little picture of Kellogg's because I know that's what I think of is cornflakes. But hey, let me give you one insider tip right off the bat. I come across this all the time with candidates who are first looking at Kellogg. It is just Kellogg. Don't say Kellogg's plural. You'll sound like a newbie. Just Kellogg. Now, this is something that if you're even thinking about Kellogg, you already know, but you know it for a reason. Their atmosphere is all about teamwork, collaboration. You don't get to work as an island at Kellogg. Frankly, if you're someone who prefers to work by yourself, has any type of problem working on teams, just don't apply. That's probably the most clear-cut piece of advice I'm going to give you today. It really is meant for team builders and contributors and leaders, which we'll talk more about that in a moment. And one other thing, Kellogg actually has a few different MBA programs. You probably know by now, both a 1-year and a 2-year full-time MBA. Key difference there being that the 1 year, it's literally a year, by the way. It starts in June and ends in June. There's no internship. And you do have to have some prerequisite courses. But for many candidates, that's an ideal way to go. If the internship is not an important part of the process for you, and you already do have these courses, or you can take them and apply in the future, it can be a nice way to get in, get out. Meantime, the 2-year MBA is the full experience, internship included. And then, of course, they have an evening weekend MBA, they have an executive MBA, and they also have some dual degrees that I'm sure you've heard of. Probably most notably is their MMM program, which is a dual with their engineering school and an MBA, and they also offer a JD MBA. So I touched on this a moment ago. I call them Lone Rangers. Lone Rangers need not apply. This is very much a competitive, a collaborative atmosphere at Kellogg. Another thing I noted here is that yes, it's a marketing school. They're never going to, I don't think anyway, lose their reputation for their strong marketing specialization. But that's not that's not all. I have several candidates and past clients who have gone on to Kellogg who work in finance, interested in going into consulting, lots of tech, and leadership, which leads me to, and sorry, by leadership, I meant general management, of course, but this leads me to the point I began to make earlier. Kellogg is looking for leaders. Sometimes this is a mistake that I see candidates make when they're applying to Kellogg, is they focus so much on what a great team player they are that they forget to mention that they can also take the helm, that they can work in this team environment but lead the team. Leadership is just as important to Kellogg as any other top-ranked MBA program, so don't forget about that part. And it bears repeating that, yes, of course, they're looking for team players, relationship builders. This reputation is a very accurate one. You don't want to apply to Kellogg without an emphasis on your abilities working in a team. And by the way, if you are accepted, you should go in expecting a very heavy teamwork environment. A couple other things they're looking for: smarts, of course, initiative, community involvement is ranked very high at Kellogg. And by the way, if you're interested in where some of this information is coming from, Oringo keeps active track based on class profiles, admissions decisions, conferences, interviews with Kellogg admissions staff and other top 10 schools. And we actually rank these traits. We like to call them admission drivers, and how each school ranks them so that you have an idea of where you need to put your emphasis. If you check out our website, aringo.com, and go to top MBA schools, you'll see that you can actually see what each school is looking for. And this is where you'll see how highly Kellogg ranked each of these areas. Speaking of comparisons and rankings, I thought it might be fun to see, this is as of last year through the US News ranking, where Kellogg has been measuring up. I wanted to take a moment to point out two things. First of all, check out that shiny GMAT average. Or if you have been watching Kellogg over the past couple of years, you might not be calling it shiny, you might be calling it something else. Because just for any of you who aren't already in on what I'm laughing about, this last year, Kellogg had a pretty impressive jump in their average GMAT, up from a 716. So of course that's an 8-point jump. Previously they'd hovered around the 715, 716 for a little while. So this is a pretty noticeable increase, especially given that it took place in just 1 year. What does that tell you as a candidate? GMAT's important. The good news is that's not new information. If you're applying to a top program, you already know your GMAT is important. But I think noting that Kellogg had this pretty large jump in 1 year is a good reinforcement of that fact that, you know, that that your competition is only getting steeper, and take this as good reason to study hard for that GMAT if you haven't done so already. It really is an important part of the process, and it's important because this is how they, this is how the admissions committees can get a sense early on in your abilities compared to other candidates, how well you're going to stand up to the rigor of the program, etc. So something to keep in mind. I also emphasize their specialization, like I talked about earlier. Yes, marketing, always marketing, but general management is another specialization that Kellogg is highly renowned for. Just some information for you. Kellogg has 3 deadlines for their program starting next year. These are them. We're coming up to September 20th. If you haven't already been working on your Kellogg application, I would strongly encourage you to either A, put everything aside that you have going on and dedicate your time to this application. And even then, it might not be enough. You'll notice we noted below, you should be writing your applications 4 to 5 months in advance. That's not because the process of actually answering the questions is going to take you that long. It's that applying to a top business school is a process. You should be visiting campuses, meeting alums, talking to the admissions department, going to info sessions and fairs. And all of that is going to be a part of your application. You'll be better prepared if you are taking steps like these. So just a heads up, this isn't something to hurry up and get in now. This is something where you want your application to be as strong as possible. So if September 20th is not looking realistic, then your next option is January 10th. I would encourage you to go for that deadline if you're not prepared to put forward a strong application in September. And then they do have a final round in April. So speaking of not waiting until the last minute, here's just a little list of things you're going to need in order to apply. I won't read these off. I know everybody can read. But these are all the important things that you're going to want to keep in mind. I did make a note here next to essays that you will have more than the 2 if you are going to write an optional essay. A quick note on the optional essay, only write that if it's actually applicable, meaning if you have a circumstance that you need to explain, such as a low GPA from undergrad, a gap in work experience, perhaps a low GMAT score. Do not, I say this with a lot of emphasis, please do not use that essay just as a space to tell them more about how great you are. It's not that I don't think you're great. It's just in the spirit of they're reviewing a lot of applications. Please don't give them more to read. I have a colleague who uses a great analogy. She says, think of that guy who takes way too long to introduce himself at a party. Don't be that guy or that gal. You will also have another essay to write if you are reapplying to Kellogg. We call it the reapplicant essay, basically explaining what's changed since last time, which, by the way, is very important. Reach out to us if you want to talk more about that. And dual degrees have additional essays as well. Of course, you'll need your GMAT. If you're a non-native English speaker, you'll need to submit for the TOEFL exam. All right, I'm going to move on. So we put in a few tips for you about how to strengthen your application, how to go through each step as strong as possible. First of all, your resume. I love this. I wish I could take credit for this first line, but I did not write it. Every candidate who applies to these schools is indeed a talented, qualified individual. This is not a program with candidates who are less than qualified. Really, that's what makes it so competitive, is that everybody who applies to these programs is quite qualified. So your job is to show what makes you unique. Make sure that you include these items that we have listed here. For example, good company descriptions. Now, for those of you coming from well-known, we call them the blue chip or blue ribbon companies, you probably won't need to go too in-depth. But for example, international applicants, company descriptions can be important. Think of things like #1 media company in Brazil, or leading NGO in Canada. Things like that. Go into more detail than I just did, please. But keep in mind that when you're applying, it helps to give some context about not just what you do there, but what the company does. That'll help you paint a clearer picture of your role. And then, of course, your responsibilities should be listed, particularly the impressive responsibilities, things that go above and beyond a daily job. In fact, skipping down to the bottom, you'll notice that we really emphasize accomplishments, that preferably your accomplishments, and by the way, preferably quantitatively, will be listed first. Oversaw a team which led to a 18% increase in productivity, implemented a measure that led to a 5% decrease in customer complaints. You can do a much better job than I'm doing right now. But the point is, you want to be really clear right out of the gate that you've been productive. And then, by the way, you'll notice right here in the middle, we mentioned that you should connect to your goals. This is something we're going to talk more about as we go on, but this is an especially important part of your entire application, is that you're not just telling them about what you have done, but you're showing how it connects to the future. Now, this is a question that we actually get asked a lot. how do I find my goal? Like, maybe I'm not entirely sure. I know the business school will be a step in the right direction, but I'm not entirely sure what I'd like to do. And it's worth putting some serious time into this question up front, because you can guarantee that the essays are going to ask you questions about your future plans, regardless of where you apply, by the way. So this is something we recommend first. Start big. What's your dream career? If you could do anything, what would it be? Then take a step down. What are some other possible areas you could work in or work towards? Then, as we just talked about, what's the connection to your history? I underline connection here for a reason. You do want to be able to show that your past experience is also going to help prepare you for your future goal. It's not just, and then I'll be ready to do this. The MBA should be part of it. It shouldn't be the only part of it, of your future goal. And then, as I mentioned here, speaking of having the MBA be part of this is where you have the opportunity to explain exactly why you need an MBA and why does it need to be Kellogg. About why Kellogg is uniquely able to provide you with the skills that you need. And then, last but not least, in case I haven't driven this home enough, show likely success. Don't just show a dotted line from your past experience and your MBA to the future. Explain why it makes sense. Explain how you are going to be successful. Dreaming is good, but start to break it down into manageable pieces. So we've been talking a lot today about teamwork and things like that. When you are planning on applying to a school like Kellogg, this is a crucial part of it, networking. And by the way, this is a real question that we get asked all the time. I do not know anybody at Kellogg. I don't even know where to begin. How do I get connected? As you can see, first of all, we do highly recommend LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a great place to start. And by the way, I'm not just talking about blindly looking up someone who went to Kellogg. You can find alumni organizations and different clubs on campus that can start to give you a feel for the culture at Kellogg. And that's a good branching off point. You might consider reaching out to professors who teach courses you're interested in, with questions, as you'll note, we wrote. In other words, not just a general, hi, I'm Sam Smith, and I'm thinking of applying to Kellogg, how are you? But directly questions about the coursework they teach. What do they enjoy about it? What would they recommend a potential student know? But look for things that are a little more specific to them. We wrote here, go to MBA fairs. This is a great way of meeting people as well, because not only do you have the opportunity to meet representatives of the school, but oftentimes there will be alums who are there as well to present and talk to potential students. Take advantage of those opportunities. And then last but not least, visit campuses whenever possible. I would almost like to draw a line through whenever possible. You should just visit, period. Go to Kellogg, take the time to meet people, sit in on a class. These are, now, of course, this is the summertime, so hopefully you already did this before the summer break. Or if you are applying in the future, you can do this this fall. But I cannot stress the importance of campus visits enough. I could give another presentation on that. Okay, so now to the good stuff. How to approach your essays. We've actually covered a lot of this already. Strategize first. This is where you begin with your future goals, your dreams, what you've accomplished in the past. Don't restrict this to just your work experience. Let's think about things like extracurriculars. Education, what were the things you were involved in while you were in school? Because what you're seeking to do is show them who you are as a person. I know this sounds a little cliche, but I really do believe that you're trying to come off the page. You want to be more than just another application. So having what I call colorful or well-written essays, that's really your best opportunity to do that, to show them who you are uniquely. And so this is where you want to include all these things we've talked about up till now, connecting answers. Oh, and by the way, there's 2 points on here that I wanted to make sure to point out. First of all, tread carefully when going outside the confines of the questions. In other words, don't get lost. Don't go too far down that. Don't go too far down the path if you decide to bring up something off to the side for a moment. You want to make sure that no matter how strong a story you think you are telling, that you're still answering the question. Remember that guy at the party? Don't be that guy. Just answer the question. It's okay to use examples, but make sure you keep it related. And then be careful when recycling essays. This is another one that I almost just threw a line through it and said don't. But then I thought, okay, let's be realistic. There are certain things that that are not going to change. After all, we are talking about you. You're not going to metamorphosize into another person. But you want to make sure that you are not just telling the exact same story to every school you apply to. For example, what have we learned today, or not learned, let's just say reinforced today? Kellogg's looking for a team player, but they're also looking for someone who leads. That's going to want to, you're going to want that to be an important or key component, of your application to Kellogg. It might not make sense to use that same strategy if you're applying to another program. So that's what we mean when we say be careful recycling. You really do want to take the time to research each school you're applying to, know why you're applying there, and adjust your application essays accordingly. Speaking of essays, here are Kellogg's essay questions. I'm betting that if you're watching this, you already know that. But just in case this was your first stop, first of all, thank you. I hope this has been helpful. But 2, these are the questions they're asking this year. By the way, if you've been looking at Kellogg for a while, you might have noticed that their essay questions changed a little. I especially am excited about this first one because it's right there. Leadership, leaders, tell us about leadership. So don't miss that. Don't miss that cue. Recommendations. Okay, I hope you're laughing at the quote up top, because that is a real quote from a candidate. Except it's supposed to say thanks. Excuse me. But yes, we really have, and we get asked variations of this question. Can I use my best friend? Can I use my colleague who's always telling me how great I am? Really is better to stick to the classic supervisor. However, there are always exceptions and reasons why you might not be able to or want to use your current supervisor. In that case, previous supervisor if you can, even if it's a supervisor from a different company, somebody higher up the ladder. It could be somebody from an extracurricular activity. But as we wrote here, choose them carefully. You really want someone who has worked with you closely and can speak to real life examples of why you are a strong candidate. Make sure you work with them so that they know what type of qualities you're looking for them to emphasize. This is another example of not recycling. You don't just send your recommenders off to write the same thing to every school you apply to. Take the time to make sure that they're going to give Kellogg an example of teamwork and an example of leadership, and then change that up for the other programs that you're looking at. The more specific, the better. I tell candidates all the time, I've never seen a quote-unquote bad letter of recommendation. In other words, bad as in, negative qualities about the candidate. But what I do see all the time, or what we consider to be weak letters of recommendation, are just too general. They use subjective words like, Jennifer is great. Dawn is fun to work with. Oh, that's the worst. We want specific examples. Remember we talked about the resume, listing quantitative accomplishments first. That's another great piece to keep in recommendation letters whenever possible. Be specific. The more, the better. Extracurricular activities. I'm sure you've heard so much about this lately that you almost might not want to hear me talk about it, but I'm going to because it's important. First of all, remember we talked about bringing color to your application, showing them who you are. And by the way, Kellogg specifically, remember how highly they ranked community and community involvement? This is an excellent example of why these things are important. If you're applying to a school that has community involvement ranked highly as one of their traits, you want to make sure that you have done some volunteering of some sort to make for a strong applicant. This also gives you opportunities to share examples outside what I call the classic 9 to 5. They hear examples all the time of leadership and teamwork and initiative and smarts at work. Tell them an interesting story about how you led a team outside of work, how you decreased waste at a company an NGO that you volunteer for. But most importantly, this is just about showing them another part of you, and that you are not only passionate about work, but that you give back. So we've already covered this. I'm not going to spend too much time here, but of course, the schools are looking for, we call it the next CEO, someone who's going to lead, work well with others, have interest in international business perhaps. But I really like this last part. Would I like to have that person in my class? Think about that when you're putting together your applications. This is a good example, going back a few screens, to being modest and mature. You do want to speak to your accomplishments, but there's a fine line, right? Going back to the guy or gal at the party, right? I really like that comparison, so I use it a lot. Trying not to just read to you, so I'm sharing and giving you a moment to read. I think a lot of this stuff is self-explanatory. One other tip, this is from one of my colleagues who I really admire his emphasis on this area. I think this drives it right home. Google yourself because your interviewer will. So in other words, make sure that your social media is clean and professional. Especially your LinkedIn. LinkedIn is something I think you can almost be guaranteed that the admissions committees, and yeah, probably your interviewer, is going to check out. But frankly, I recommend that you scrub all of your social media if necessary. It might not already be necessary. But, just a point that I often make is that even if you, strive to keep your social media clean and controversy-free, you might have a friend or two that has tagged you in something or posted something on your page, or you get the picture. So don't overlook your online presence. Make sure that it also represents who you are, your goals, what a great employee and leader you are. Don't let that paint a story that you don't want it to paint. Oh, and by the way, at the end here, we mentioned show a person who's interested in making an impact. So yes, your extracurriculars should be on your LinkedIn as well. Thought I'd share a few of Kellogg's interview questions. These were real questions from Kellogg interviews just this year. Pretty straightforward. I don't think any of these should surprise you, but I will put an emphasis on what are your short-term and long-term goals. Be ready to talk about that. Be ready to talk about what your goal is immediately following business school, 5 years later, and 10 years later. No surprise, there was a question here about working well on a team, but I'll tell you, another candidate who shared their interview experience with us mentioned that instead of being asked about team, they were asked about leadership. So keep in mind, you might be asked about one or both. And by the way, this is just like a job interview. You notice at the end, any questions for me? Yes, have questions ready. Since the recommender the interviewer will oftentimes be an alum. If they are, ask them what they liked about Kellogg. Ask them about their personal experience. Ask them what you think any serious candidate should know. Don't squander that opportunity. All right, so just to keep things interesting and give you guys a heads up, some of this we already covered, but these are the most common mistakes I see when I'm looking at dinged Kellogg applications. and not to mention talking to them. First things first, the interviews. Their interview policy confuses a lot of people. I tend to hear one of two things. Either one, this can't be that big of a deal because Kellogg interviews everybody. First of all, more and more, that's not true anymore. They've run out of interview slots and granted interview waivers. We'll talk about that in a moment. But this is absolutely an important part of the process. Do not undervalue it. You should be as prepared for a Kellogg interview as any other top program. And then, speaking of those waivers, definitely talked to a few candidates over the last year who were panicking because they heard interview invites went out and they didn't hear anything. That does not mean that you've been dinged, although I do go on to quantify this, at least not at first. What the interview waivers mean is that it actually allows the admissions committee to go on and review the rest of your application. The reason this is important to know is because previously, when they really were trying to interview everyone, well, they still are trying, they would not review your application until the interview was done. That was part of the piece that they would want to review. Now, by granting you a waiver, they'll go on to review the rest of your application, and then they'll invite you to an interview. So that's actually a very good sign. So just something to keep in mind if this happens to you, if you're not invited right off the bat, too soon to panic. We talked about this already enough, so I'm just going to say it. Too much focus on teamwork, forgot to talk about leadership. And abusing the optional essay. We covered that earlier too. Only use the optional essay if you need it. And when I say need, I mean to address something that could be a potential concern. Again, a GPA from undergrad that's lower than it should have been, a gap in work experience. That really is all that the optional essay is meant for. It's not meant to be more opportunities to toot your own horn. All right. So hopefully I haven't gone too far over on time here, but I want to just first of all say thank you for letting me share today some tips on applying to Kellogg and a little more information about the school. I'd love to take a few questions, so I'm going to go ahead and see if I can remember how to do this. Sorry, I might take away the presentation here. All right, so what kind of growth examples can you show for essay 2? Excellent question. So yes, the second essay question asks about how candidates foresee themselves growing while they're at Kellogg, and how they have already grown. You know, this is actually a good example of a time where I would say try not to go for the quote unquote easy answer of I'm going to grow as a team player. I can guarantee you there are way too many candidates that are going to answer like that. I think growth, this is a good opportunity to talk about areas that you foresee being able to strengthen. So say, for example, if you would like to grow in the area of time management, or if you would like to be able to strengthen your abilities in conflict resolution. There's really no wrong answers, provided that you do a good job of explaining why you wish to strengthen it. In other words, of course, you don't want to shoot yourself in the foot, but I would not hesitate to be honest about areas where you think you could improve, because this can also give you an opportunity to explain how Kellogg's program could help you with that. If you are a reapplicant and improved your GMAT score considerably, would you mention that in the optional essay? Yes, I would. In fact, actually, a better place for that would be in your reapplicant essay, although that might be what you're referring to. Let's assume that you are. So yes, I would absolutely, if you have, especially since you said that you improved your score considerably, I would absolutely mention it. I wouldn't make that a standalone fact, and I'm hoping that you have more improvements than only your GMAT score, but you can absolutely mention the improvement in GMAT. That's an important piece, especially if you've either raise the bar so that your score is competitive or even high compared to their average. Let's see, what advice would you have for overrepresented applicants? That is always a tough one. First of all, this is another big, forgive me, but another big vote for having extracurricular activities. Once again, this is a way that you can stand out from the crowd, and make sure that you are honest about what your goals are. I know that sounds like such a simple answer, but frankly, that is the problem that I see with applicants in general, by the way, not just overrepresented, but even non-traditional candidates feeling like they have to give the quote-unquote safe answers. Be truthful about what your passions are. Like I said, it's kind of a combination of both. They want to see what your true passion is, but you also have to explain why it makes sense. So good time into your applications, extracurricular activities, and of course, a competitive GMAT score. I always hate that I have to bring it up, but it's a reality. Let's see here. Thoughts on older candidates over 30. You know, I'm not as pessimistic about candidates over 30 as some of my fellow admissions consultants might be. I've seen many successful candidates over 30 get into top business schools, including Kellogg. What it really comes down to is being able to paint a clear picture of why an MBA and why an MBA now. And when I say why MBA, what do you hope to get from it? Right now, you might be thinking, but I'm supposed to do that anyway. Exactly. And by the way, not every, I call them experienced candidate, not every experienced candidate is created equal. I have had some candidates where it has been worth it to actually address why they're applying a little bit later than other candidates. But I've also had candidates where it actually did not fit into the story. Their progression made sense, and so there was no reason to draw extra attention to it. Truth be told, we do have to look at the reality. The average student at most of these programs, 27 to 29 years old. And so it is a factor. We can't pretend that it isn't. But I'd go back to being truthful about your own story. Let's see here. With a little below 3.0 GPA, how difficult will it be for me to get into Kellogg? Okay, that is tough to level with you. Having a low GPA is a hard obstacle to overcome. The best way to at least make yourself competitive is to bring in a high, a competitive to high GMAT score. I like to use the analogy of a teeter-totter with GPA and GMAT score. If one is low, the other one had better be high. However, it's not as simple as that, because the truth is, if you have for example, I know nobody asked this, but I'm going to send it out there. Don't think that a high GPA will overshadow a low GMAT score. But with a low GPA, you could possibly be competitive if you have a high GMAT score and the rest of your application is strong. And what I mean by that is your work experience, your extracurricular abilities, etc. If you are possibly lacking in any other areas, and by the way, don't hesitate to reach out to us to discuss your specific situation in more detail. But it's really going to depend on the rest of your profile and application on whether you're going to be competitive. Some examples for positives for let me just read this out loud because I think I'm getting it wrong. Can you give some examples that will really add in positives for a reapplicant? I'm going to level with all of you. I think if you're a reapplicant, you need to, just like they're asking you, be able to explain why you are a stronger candidate in the past. I think that the easy ones, quote unquote, are the best ones. In other words, having a promotion, improvement in GMAT score, things like that are are great. And by the way, I talked about this earlier in response to somebody else's question, but the GMAT score, don't let that be your only improvement. If nothing else has changed, I actually would not advise reapplying. But a higher GMAT score and a promotion, or a higher GMAT score and a strong accomplishment at work, like maybe you oversaw a major project or closed a large client, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe you got to work overseas for a few months and lead a team over there. The sky really is the limit, but my point is, you remember we talked earlier about having quantifiable accomplishments. Make sure that that's part of the process here. And by the way, I know I've said and GMAT and GMAT. If you already have a strong GMAT score, please don't feel like you need to go take it again. But again, don't let that be the only part of your profile that has changed. One other note on this, if I may, because I talk to a handful of candidates in this situation every year where their profile was already perfectly competitive, but they applied at the end of the year. They applied in the final round and they rushed through it, and maybe they didn't use an expert to assist them with their application. You know, everything was just rushed, and now they just want to slow down and do it the right way. Unfortunately, no, you really do need to have an improvement here. So looks like we are actually running out of time here. So just a quick note here. Please don't hesitate to reach back out to Oringo. Our website is oringo.com. We have a complimentary chances calculator where you can plug in different factors like GMAT score, leadership experience, all kinds of different factors to get an idea of where you stand in regards to the top programs. You can also sign up for a complimentary consultation. That will either be with myself or one of my colleagues. And of course, talk to us about the services that we offer. We would love to be of assistance to you. Thanks again, everybody, for joining. It's been a lot of fun, and I hope this has been helpful. Good luck to all of you, and do reach out if we can help. Bye-bye.